Welcome back to another episode of Boss Economics World, where we pour a tall glass of straight facts and take a hard look at the scariest monster that haunts your wallet, governments that don't understand economics. Today, we're diving straight into the chaos storm kicked up by Donald Trump's threatened tariffs on Canada and Mexico. And trust me, this isn't just a policy decision that sits in a bubble, this is a full-on, multi-billion-dollar mess that could add $100 million a year to New England's electricity bills alone. Let that sink in. One man's tariff tantrum could be squeezing your electricity bill harder than hefty inflation already is. Let's snap back to reality. Trump did what populist politicians love doing, he looked at America's trade deficit and said, hey, tariffs can fix that. Slap a tax on foreign goods, they thought, and US manufacturing will boom, job creation will soar, GDP will skyrocket, and everyone will be swimming in more money than they know what to do with. But we economists know that's the theoretical, overly optimistic world they've concocted, and real-world economics doesn't work that way. Tariffs are not some magic solution to make the domestic market more competitive overnight. No, they interfere with complex global supply chains, raise costs for consumers, increase input prices for domestic industries reliant on foreign goods, and, in this case, have the potential to strain North America's deeply interconnected energy systems. Let's walk through why these tariffs are particularly dangerous, why they'll likely backfire, and how they could end up torching your electricity bill. Let me spell it out for you. Electricity isn't like your standard consumer good. You can't just say, oh well, let's produce our own electricity and forget about imports. You see, North America's energy grid is not just a patchwork of isolated systems, it's a deeply interconnected network, where Canada, the United States, and Mexico regularly buy, sell, and trade power to meet demands. In total, nearly 10% of U.S. electricity comes directly from Canada, primarily hydroelectric power, which is clean, dirt cheap, and renewable. Massachusetts officials estimate that if Trump slaps even a 10% tariff on imported Canadian hydropower, New England alone would face an additional $100 million in annual energy costs. Multiply that across the rest of the country, and the numbers start getting apocalyptic. Think of it this way, increased tariffs would mean higher costs on electricity, which would hit your wallet twice. First, through your electricity bill, obviously. And second, it's like a domino effect. Higher energy costs squeeze every business that needs to keep the lights on, triggering price hikes across industries. Data centers, factories, and electric vehicles will all drive demand, and as long as tariffs are pushing prices up and supply is strained, you end up paying more for your iPhone, Amazon package, and electric car, while still paying through the nose to keep your house warm and your fridge running. And a fair warning, inflation is already sitting at uncomfortable levels in the post-pandemic world. Any extra burden on household energy bills is going to politically test even the most loyal voter base. The man on the street is already fed up with higher gas, food, and rent prices. Now, imagine kicking him while he's down with another surge in electricity costs. Oof. In the fantasyland where protectionist policies are inflated with pride, Trump imagined America flicking the switch to energy self-sufficiency. You know, that old America First fairy tale. Let's pop that balloon before it gets any bigger. Domestic U.S. energy production costs more, period. Renewables haven't completely scaled up to meet demand yet, and fossil fuels, particularly natural gas, carry higher price tags. So if utilities can no longer count on cheap Canadian imports and have to rely on domestically sourced energy, what happens? They'll scramble for alternatives, buying from domestic plants at a higher rate. Now, given that domestic energy plants are facing greater input costs too, thanks to tariff-induced price hikes on essentials like transformers and conductors, imported from, you guessed it, Mexico, we're looking at a worst-case scenario where the U.S. becomes trapped in a feedback loop of escalating energy expenses. Let's talk about Mexico for a second. While the headlines screamed about Canadian hydropower, Mexico has quietly been exporting $6.3 billion worth of power grid equipment, like transformers and conductors, to the U.S. every year. Key pieces in running our electric grid. Mexico actually provides a third of the U.S.'s total imports of electrical transformers and equipment. Now, let's remember, Trump's tariffs weren't targeting electricity imports alone, they were eyeing essential infrastructure components. If the U.S. returns the favor and slaps a 25% tariff on Mexican imports, it's game over for any notion of keeping electricity grids afloat cheaply. The supply chain issue gets even more precarious considering transformers are essential to the functioning of any power grid, and the demand for this equipment is only increasing. Data centers, electric vehicles, and the move toward more electrified production lines all mean that utilities need to upgrade their equipment yesterday, not next year. When you throw in tariffs on these products, prices rise across the entire supply chain, squeezing U.S. utilities at a time when America is trying to rapidly shift towards more electrified, sustainable energy solutions. Look, CEOs in the energy industry are already dealing with navigating massive shifts toward renewable energy as fossil fuels decline. Doubling or tripling their infrastructure and equipment costs, that's going to be a burden most companies can't shoulder easily. Expect to see steep hikes for consumers. Now, let's expand beyond just electricity bills, as if that extra $100 million for New England wasn't bad enough. Tariffs don't exist in a vacuum. Canada and Mexico aren't going to sit back and say, "Oh, golly, you win, Mr. Trump." No, they're going to hit back with counter tariffs. Trade wars are inevitable, and they're bruiser fights where everyone leaves the ring battered. Look at the US-China trade war, an ongoing saga where tariffs have led to massive retorts, hurting both countries economically. Bank of International Settlements estimated these tariffs reduced global GDP growth by 1.7% over 3 years. On top of that, in a direct cost analysis, the USA paid more than $50 billion in higher import prices between just 2018 and 2019. The numbers are staggering. The same scenario will happen with Canada and Mexico. On top of higher energy prices, manufacturing sectors in the US, automotive, machinery, and electronics, to name a few, that rely on a seamless flow of cross-border goods will be hurt by trade retaliations. This means US jobs will be lost, prices on consumer goods will rise, and industries across the board will take a financial hit. Oh, and don't think the US can afford more trade retaliation. The latest from the World Trade Organization estimates indicate that global trade volumes as a percentage of world GDP have declined in the aftermath of the pandemic and are having a sluggish recovery. At a critical moment for global economies, reigniting trade tensions couldn't be worse timing. So who gets caught in the shameful mess left by bungled economic policies? You and I, the ordinary person. Let's be crystal clear about what's happening. Tariffs are effectively taxes on yourself. Politicians love framing trade tariffs as a stick to beat foreigners, but guess who handles the make-good payment when foreign price hikes roll in? Consumers. Look again at the inflation rate. Squeezing households on energy is going to push consumer confidence even lower. Bloomberg cites concerns that higher energy costs could even shrink GDP by another 0.3%. Yeah, it doesn't sound like much until you remember that we're already dealing with stagnation risks. Add that to existing inflation issues, paying more for clothes, food, imports, housing, and you've got a recipe for disaster straight out of an undergraduate economics textbook. Consumer spending, the bedrock of the US economy, is already getting shaky under the inflationary strain. According to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, BEA, in 2023 consumer expenditures only grew by 2.6%, significantly down from previous years. Now, add a couple of $100 extra a year in electricity payments, and you've got a recipe for an impending recession. So, what's the moral here? When you dig through all the tough talk about tariffs and leveling the playing field, you'll see a policy that's filled with contradictions, inefficiencies, and unintended consequences. It's not a show of strength. It's a chaotic experiment that misdiagnoses the actual economic problem. Trump's tariffs on Canadian and Mexican energy imports won't lead to the kind of renaissance in the U.S. domestic energy sector that he's hoping for. Instead, they'll drive up energy prices, exacerbate inflation, make U.S. goods more expensive to produce, and ultimately weaken the very industries we should be supporting to lead us into the future. Incompetence at this scale isn't just bad politics, it's bad economics, and it's you who'll be footing the bill. So buckle up, America. Keep those candles on standby, you might need them next time that energy bill rolls in. Be sure to thumbs up, subscribe, and let us know in the comments, what policy mess would you like us to break down next time? Until then, stay financially savvy, and don't buy the hype. This is Boss Economics World, signing off.